Jack had always been a successful businessman with a lavish lifestyle. He had a big house, an expensive car, and plenty of money. At 50 years old, he felt like his life was comfortable but lacked the excitement it once had. That all changed when he met Samantha. She was 27 years old, a tall, beautiful blonde who worked as a model. From the moment they crossed paths, Jack felt alive again. Her youthful energy brought out a side of him that he thought had long been buried. Suddenly, life wasn't just about work and money anymore, it was about adventure, passion, and feeling young. After a whirlwind romance, Jack married Samantha, and for the first couple of years, things were perfect. He adored her beauty, and she enjoyed the comfort his wealth provided. Samantha didn't have to work too hard as a model anymore. Jack's fortune allowed her the freedom to choose when she wanted to work. Their house was filled with parties, laughter, and everything Jack could have dreamed of. He believed that marrying her was the best decision of his life. But then, something happened in the second year of their marriage that rattled Jack's world. One night, while they were out of town, someone broke into their home. The burglar took $100,000 in cash and valuables, and curiously, the security cameras in the house had been turned off beforehand. Jack was devastated, not just by the financial loss but by the feeling of violation. He had always been so careful, ensuring his house was well secured, but now someone had outsmarted him. The police investigated, but there were no solid leads. The fact that the cameras had been turned off made it seem like an inside job, but Jack trusted Samantha completely. As the months went by, the relationship that had once brought him so much joy started to feel strained. Samantha had become distant. She would spend long hours out, claiming she was with friends or attending events, but Jack's gut told him something was wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the robbery than met the eye. His mind raced with questions he didn't want to ask, doubts he didn't want to entertain. Was Samantha involved? Could she really be capable of betraying him like that? Jack wasn't the type of man to accuse without evidence, so he tried to push the thoughts aside. However, the nagging feeling in his chest wouldn't go away. He had worked too hard all his life to build what he had, and now it felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. Samantha's increasing absences only made him more suspicious, and he couldn't help but wonder if the woman who once made him feel young again was hiding something darker than he could have ever imagined. Samantha had been acting differently lately, which only added to Jack's growing unease. She had started asking him to take her on vacation, somewhere far away, out of the country. She would bring it up almost every day, suggesting exotic destinations, Italy, Greece, the Maldives. At first, Jack was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to suddenly want to spend so much time alone with him, especially given how distant she had been over the past few months. But every time she mentioned the idea, her words were wrapped in affection, sweetly emphasizing how much she loved him and how important it was for them to spend quality time together. Jack couldn't help but feel surprised by her sudden enthusiasm. "We need this, Jack," she would say, her eyes wide with sincerity. "I love you, and we haven't really had time just for us since we got married. Let's escape everything for a while, just you and me." On the surface, it sounded perfect. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to think that this was a chance to rekindle their relationship, to get back to the passionate connection they once shared. But something about her insistence didn't sit right. The timing seemed strange, especially after the robbery. Why now, after months of distance? Why now, when they had barely been spending time together at all? Samantha's affectionate words, the sudden desire to leave the country, it was all so unexpected. Jack had always thought she enjoyed their luxurious life at home, the parties, the attention. But here she was, almost pleading with him to leave it all behind for a while, telling him how much she missed him, how much she loved him. She had even started planning some of the details, sending him links to beautiful villas, all-inclusive resorts, and private getaways. Part of Jack wanted to believe that this was her way of reconnecting, that maybe she felt guilty for how distant she had been and was trying to make amends. But another part of him, the part that had been growing more and more suspicious, wondered if there was something more to this sudden desire to leave the country. He couldn't forget how the house had been robbed and how the cameras had mysteriously been turned off in advance. He wanted to trust Samantha. After all, she had brought so much life back into his world. But there was a nagging voice in the back of his mind, warning him that something wasn't adding up. Was this vacation really about them reconnecting? Or was it about something else entirely? Eventually, Jack gave in to Samantha's persistent requests, and they booked a trip to Italy. She was overjoyed, hugging him tightly when he agreed, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she told him it was exactly what they needed. Jack couldn't deny that the idea of getting away from everything, the stress, the business, the lingering tension, sounded appealing. Maybe this was what their marriage needed, a fresh start away from all the distractions. But despite his desire to believe that, the doubts gnawing at the back of his mind wouldn't go away. In the days leading up to their departure, Jack couldn't shake the memories of the break-in. The feeling of violation, the unexplained deactivation of the cameras, it all kept swirling in his head. The authorities had come up empty, but Jack was a businessman, he knew when something didn't add up. He trusted Samantha, or at least he wanted to, but he couldn't ignore the strange coincidences. So, without telling her, he decided to do something about it. Before they left for Italy, Jack spent an afternoon checking all the security cameras in their house. He meticulously went through each one, making sure they were functioning properly. He had upgraded the system since the robbery, adding more advanced features and better surveillance. He checked the feeds, tested the backup batteries, and double-checked the system's logs for any signs of tampering. Everything seemed in perfect working order. If anything happened while they were away, he'd know immediately. Samantha didn't seem to notice his sudden interest in the security system. She was too busy finalizing the trip details, packing their bags, and dreaming about the beaches of Amalfi or the romantic streets of Venice. Every time she caught Jack frowning at his laptop or inspecting the cameras, she would wrap her arms around him, nuzzle into his neck, and whisper, "I can't wait to have you all to myself. It'll be just us, Jack. No worries. No stress. Just love." Her words were sweet, reassuring even. But Jack still felt a flicker of unease. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the robbery was just a random crime, and Samantha really did just want to get away with him. But deep down, he couldn't let go of the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He told himself that checking the cameras was just a precaution, that it was something any cautious person would do after what had happened. Yet, he couldn't deny the sense of foreboding that clung to him as they prepared to leave. The day finally came, and as they boarded the plane, Samantha held his hand tightly, her face glowing with anticipation. Jack looked out the window, trying to shake off the last of his doubts. He had done everything he could to secure the house. Now, he told himself, it was time to focus on their vacation, on rebuilding what had started to crack between them. He hoped that this trip would be the fresh start she promised it would be. But even as the plane lifted off, a quiet, nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that this wasn't over, not yet. Jack and Samantha arrived in Italy to a picturesque scene straight out of a travel brochure. The sun glistened off the gentle waves of the Amalfi coast, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh sea breezes and citrus groves. For a moment, Jack allowed himself to relax. Maybe this was what they needed, a chance to reconnect, away from the tensions of home. He watched Samantha as she unpacked, her eyes full of excitement as she talked about the places they'd visit, the romantic dinners they'd share. For the first time in months, she seemed genuinely happy. It felt almost too perfect. That evening, after a long day of exploring the coastal towns, they retreated to their luxurious villa. Samantha fell asleep quickly, her body exhausted from the day, but Jack remained awake, staring out the window at the darkened sea. His thoughts drifted to the house back home, the security cameras, and the precautions he had taken before they left. He reached for his phone, almost out of habit, and glanced at the security app he had installed to monitor the cameras. Everything seemed normal. The house was empty, just as they had left it. Jack finally let his guard down and decided to join Samantha in bed, hoping to clear his mind and enjoy the vacation. He closed his eyes and allowed himself to sink into the plush pillows, his body heavy with exhaustion. But just as he was about to drift off, his phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand. Jack groggily reached for it, squinting at the bright screen. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the notification: "Warning, unauthorized attempt to access your home security system." His pulse quickened as he shot upright in bed. He tapped the notification, and sure enough, there it was: someone was trying to hack into the cameras at their house. Jack's mind raced. Who could it be? Why now, of all times? He had taken every precaution, upgraded the system, made sure everything was secure. But here it was, happening again, just like before. Someone was trying to get into his home. He stared at the screen, trying to remain calm, but the unease that had been simmering in him for months surged to the surface. He glanced over at Samantha, who was sleeping soundly beside him. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Could she be involved? Was it possible she knew something about this? The robbery, the cameras, her sudden insistence on a vacation, it all felt too coincidental. His heart pounded as suspicion gripped him. Jack knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just bad luck. Something was wrong, and he wasn't about to sit in Italy while someone broke into his home, again. Without hesitation, he woke Samantha. "We need to go home," he said firmly, his voice tense. Samantha stirred, confused and groggy. "What?" "Jack, it's the middle of the night," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" "I just got a notification from the security system," Jack said, his voice sharp. "Someone is trying to hack into the cameras." Samantha blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to surprise. "What? Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Jack snapped, his suspicion only growing as he watched her reaction. "We need to leave. Now." Samantha sat up fully, looking bewildered. "Jack, it's probably just a glitch. We're in Italy, for God's sake. Can't you just call someone to check on the house?" But Jack wasn't having it. "No," he said, his voice firm. "We're going home. I'm not sitting here while someone breaks into our house again." Without waiting for a response, Jack grabbed his phone and dialed the police back home. His mind raced as he explained the situation to the officer on the line, urging them to send someone to the house immediately. As the police assured him they'd dispatch a unit to investigate, Jack felt the pit in his stomach grow deeper. This wasn't just a random event, it was connected to everything that had been bothering him for months. The robbery, the cameras, Samantha's insistence on leaving the country, it all felt tied together in a way he couldn't ignore anymore. Hanging up the phone, he turned to Samantha. "I'm not risking it. I'm not going to sit here while something happens at home." Samantha's eyes widened, her voice shaking slightly as she said, "Jack, don't you think you're overreacting? It's probably nothing." Jack narrowed his eyes at her, his suspicion thickening with every word she spoke. "I don't think it's nothing, Samantha. And frankly, I'm not sure I can trust you right now." Her face paled, and for a moment, she seemed speechless. "Jack, what are you talking about?" But Jack didn't answer. He was already packing his things, his mind set. They were going home, and he was going to find out exactly who was behind this, and why. He couldn't shake the feeling that Samantha knew more than she was letting on, and he wasn't about to be played for a fool. As the plane touched down back home, Jack could barely contain the tension gripping his chest. The quiet hum of the airport, the typical announcements, and the bustle of travelers around them were all drowned out by the storm brewing inside him. Beside him, Samantha was uncharacteristically quiet. Jack hadn't spoken much to her during the flight. His thoughts were consumed with what awaited them when they arrived home, and more than anything, he was determined to uncover the truth. His suspicions about Samantha had only deepened since he received that notification about the cameras, and he needed answers. When they stepped out of the airport and into a cab, Jack received a call from the police. They had caught the intruder. The man had been apprehended while trying to disable the cameras, just as Jack had feared. They were holding him at the station, and Jack was instructed to come down to provide any additional information that might help with the investigation. We need to go to the police station now, Jack said as they got into the cab, his voice sharp and final. Samantha glanced at him, startled. Now? Jack, we just got off a plane. Can't we go home first? You're exhausted. No, Jack cut her off, his eyes hard. We're going to the station. I want to see who this guy is. And I want you to come with me. Samantha froze for a moment, her expression unreadable. Me? Why do I need to go? Jack's gaze narrowed. Because I want to see your reaction. Whoever this is, they've been targeting our house twice now. I think you should be there, Samantha. She hesitated, biting her lip. Fine, she said quietly, avoiding his eyes as she agreed. The cab ride to the station was silent and tense. Jack's mind raced, running through every possible scenario. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that Samantha was involved in some way. The pieces didn't fit, the robbery, the cameras being tampered with, and now this burglar being caught in the act. If Samantha had nothing to hide, why had she been so reluctant to come? They arrived at the police station, and Jack immediately marched to the front desk, showing his ID and explaining who he was. The officer nodded and led them down a hallway toward the holding cells. Jack's heart pounded with anticipation, every step toward the truth feeling heavier than the last. Finally, they reached the interrogation room, where the burglar was being held. Jack took a deep breath as the officer opened the door, revealing a disheveled man sitting at the table. The burglar's face was partially hidden by his long hair, but something about him seemed familiar. Jack stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the man. And then, the burglar looked up, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was him. He recognized the man immediately. Jack turned to Samantha, watching her reaction closely. Her face went pale as soon as her eyes met the burglar's. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, but no words came out. Jack could see the shock in her eyes, the way her body tensed at the sight of the man in front of them. Do you know him? Jack asked, his voice low and cold. Samantha's silence was answer enough. Jack's hands clenched into fists. He stepped toward her, his voice rising. Samantha, do you know him? Samantha swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Jack and the man at the table. Jack, this isn't what it looks like. Jack's blood boiled. Then explain it. Because right now, it looks like you know exactly who he is. The burglar, who had remained silent, finally spoke up, his voice hoarse. Samantha, you didn't tell him about me? Jack's head whipped around to the burglar, disbelief flooding his expression. Tell me what? Samantha looked panicked now, her hands trembling as she faced Jack. He's my ex, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under him. Her ex. The pieces started to fall into place in Jack's mind, each one more painful than the last. Samantha's sudden insistence on a vacation, the robbery a year ago where the cameras had been turned off, and now this man, trying to hack into their security system again. Your ex, Jack repeated, his voice full of disbelief. He's the one who robbed us before, isn't he? Samantha shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't know, Jack. I swear I didn't know he'd do this. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. How long, Samantha? How long has he been in contact with you? Were you working with him the whole time? Is this why you wanted us to leave the country? No. Samantha cried, her voice cracking. I didn't know about the robbery. I hadn't seen him in years until he contacted me a few months ago. A few months ago? Jack's voice dripped with bitterness. And you didn't think to tell me? You didn't think I had a right to know? Samantha was sobbing now, her face in her hands. I thought it was over, Jack. I didn't know he would come after us again. I thought he just wanted to reconnect. Jack shook his head, stepping away from her. He felt a cold sense of betrayal wash over him. Samantha's ex had been the one behind everything, the robbery, the hacking, the attempt to ruin their lives. And Samantha had kept it all hidden from him. The officer cleared his throat, breaking the tense silence. "We've got enough evidence to hold him for breaking and entering, and with your testimony about the previous robbery, we'll be able to investigate further." Jack barely heard him. His mind was spinning, caught between the rage and the heartbreak of knowing the woman he had married had been hiding such a dangerous secret. Without looking back at Samantha, Jack turned to the officer. "Do whatever it takes to keep him locked up. I'll give you my full cooperation." He stormed out of the station, leaving Samantha standing there, sobbing. The man she once loved had tried to destroy their life, and she had let him get close enough to do it. Jack's world had been turned upside down, and now there was no going back. Jack stood outside the police station, his heart pounding with rage and betrayal. The crisp night air did little to calm him as he replayed the events in his head, the robbery, the hacking, the lies, and most of all, the truth about Samantha's involvement. He had hoped against all reason that she wasn't part of it, that her tears and pleas were genuine. But the truth had become painfully clear. Samantha had been using him, and the man she had brought back into their lives was nothing more than a tool in a much larger scheme. As he stood there, the officer approached him. "Mr. Jackson, do you want to proceed with the charges against the intruder? We're ready to process him." Jack clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. He nodded, but something deep inside him was screaming that this wasn't enough. The betrayal ran deeper than just this man, it was Samantha. His wife. The woman he had loved, who had brought him so much joy, had been using him for his money. And worse, she had been complicit in the very theft that had shattered his sense of security. He couldn't ignore the evidence any longer. Jack turned to the officer, his voice low but firm. "I want you to arrest my wife too." The officer blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Your wife, sir?" "Yes," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "She's involved. There's enough evidence to prove it. She's been in contact with that man, her ex, for months, and she's helped him plan this." "The robbery from before? The cameras being turned off?" "She knew. She was part of it." Samantha, who had followed him outside, gasped. "Jack, no," she cried, rushing toward him. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with panic. "You can't do this. Please, Jack, don't." Jack turned to face her, his expression cold and resolute. "I gave you everything, Samantha. I trusted you. But you lied to me. You used me." Samantha dropped to her knees, clutching at his hand, her voice breaking. "Please, Jack. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. I love you. I do. Please, don't let them take me. I'll make it right, I swear." But Jack's heart had hardened. "Love?" he scoffed, pulling his hand away from her grasp. "You don't know what love is, Samantha. You used me for my money, and you let that man back into our lives to rob me twice. You didn't care about me. You cared about what I could give you." Samantha's sobs grew louder as she tried to explain. "It wasn't like that. I didn't know he was going to do all this. I just thought we could." "Stop," Jack said, cutting her off, his voice cold and final. "There's no more lying. The evidence is there, Samantha. The police have proof of your involvement. The cameras, the timing, the messages, you were in on it from the start. And I won't protect you anymore." The officer, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably, clearly hesitant. "Sir, are you sure? This is your wife we're talking about." Jack swallowed hard, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a ton of bricks. He hated this. He hated what it had come to. But there was no other choice. He couldn't let her get away with it. Not after everything. "I'm sure," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "Arrest her." Samantha's face crumpled as the reality of the situation hit her. "No, please. Jack, Please. I'll go away. I'll leave, I swear. Just don't do this. But Jack had made his decision. It's too late, Samantha. The officer stepped forward, his face grim. Mrs. Jackson, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy and involvement in the robbery of your residence. Samantha screamed, her hands shaking as she tried to resist, but there was no escaping it now. The officer gently but firmly pulled her to her feet, placing handcuffs around her wrists. Samantha looked at Jack, her eyes filled with desperation. Jack, please, she begged one last time, her voice hoarse. Don't let them take me. I'm your wife. But Jack couldn't look at her. He turned away, his heart heavy with a mixture of sorrow and anger. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He had married Samantha thinking she would bring joy and youth back into his life, that they would build something together. But it had all been a lie, and now he was left with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. As the police led Samantha toward the squad car, her cries echoing through the night, Jack stood there, watching in silence. He had loved her once, with everything he had. But now, that love had turned to ashes, leaving behind nothing but the cold truth of what she had done. She had betrayed him. And now, she would face the consequences.